For me, a lot of the things that I kept asking myself was, why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to my family? Everything was fine before this. And for me, it made me feel like, okay, now this kind of makes sense. It doesn't still, because I still don't understand why they did the alienating to begin with. But now that I understand what this is, I now understand why my thoughts are shaped the way they are.
Thank you for being here so much. I am really happy to meet you and connect with you. I understand that. So, do you mind if we start at the beginning? Can you describe what your life was like, what your early years were like, maybe before the alienation?
hmm Yeah. So I would say that I had like what I would call the picture perfect family. I had a little brother, and my mom and my dad were married up until I was about 6. There was a lot of family and community in those early years. My father and my mother loved me endlessly. My mom was not even supposed to have children. She was born with a genetic defect of her biological reproductive organs. And so she wasn't supposed to have children. And I was actually born overseas, and we had so many adventures before we moved back stateside.
Wow.
I have so many pictures still of me wearing a kilt in Scotland, and, all those cute little pictures. Um, my brother came into the picture, and I was a jealous sister for the first 6 months, but then I loved him afterwards. I really took on the role of protector. And right before my parents' divorce, I remember sneaking out of my bedroom one night. And in that, I heard my parents screaming at each other for the first time. And I remember hearing my mom sobbing. And then it wasn't long after that they explained to me they were getting separated. And I didn't know what that meant. I was just excited. I'm like, oh, I get 2 princess beds? Oh, cool. I get 2 toy chests? Oh, heck yeah. Like, I'm down for this.
How old were you?
And I was like 6 or 7. I don't remember exactly, but I think I was like 6 or 7.
Mm,
And when my mom was going through the divorce, something unfortunately happened to me by one of my mom's best friend's sons. And that was kind of like a weird point where like depression started to kind of plague over my life. We moved to Georgia shortly afterwards. And so very soon, like, my grades began to tank. My father did not move with us. It was only my mom, me, an au pair, because that's all that she could do because she had to work. She had to work. And my father did not join us, I think, for the first like either 6 to 8 months that we were down there. And I remember that feeling of like real loneliness,
yeah.
because I had been used to a family where I was seeing my mom for the first 2 days of the week. I was seeing my dad for the second 2 days after the divorce, and then they would get every other weekend. And so there was like a blended family, even though they were separated. And so I was so used to that. But when we came to Georgia, it was immediately my mom had to work more. I was stuck with au pairs all day, and my father was nowhere to be seen. Now, eventually, my grades got so bad, he had to intervene. And he was like, I'm not letting my child, fail. I think I was in like the second grade. He's like, I'm not letting my child fail the second grade. And so he jumped in, came back to Georgia, and kind of reinserted himself back into the family. And that's when I noticed some discourse starting between my mom and my dad. And it's literally come to me this last week, realizing and actually accepting that my mom had as much, or a couple parts more sometimes, in them alienating each other and trying to use both me and my brother as a rope in a game of tug of war. And it started, my first memory of it was I was at Stone Mountain, and my mom had just got cut off by this car, and she threw her hands up in the steering wheel and started having a hysterical fit, crying and screaming in the parking lot. I'm in the passenger seat, terrified, and she's screaming, I hate your father. I hate him. And she's screaming this at the top of her lungs. And I think I'm maybe like, I think that maybe there's like a year that's passed at this point. I'm like 8 or 9. And
Yeah.
I remember having to console my mother for the first time. And that was so wrong. I wish, like, if there was a time machine, if I could go back to that exact moment, I think I would have started crying too instead, because that's how I was feeling inside. I wanted to cry because I was petrified about what the hell is going on. Um,
Was parentification a common theme that went on from that point?
yeah. Then my father started to do it. There was one time where I left the house without a bra after starting to come into puberty. And he made a comment about your mother should never have let you leave the house without a bra on, and very pointedly said it.
Let me ask you this. So your parents divorced, your dad, did he give you a reason for why he didn't move immediately?
He cited that the house was hard to sell, but I'll be honest, as an adult, I find that hard to believe.
So when he finally moved to Georgia, what was the co-parenting like for however long they were trying to co-parent?
Well, it was good, I would say, for the first year. And then something started to happen. And I think it was when my stepmother started to come into the picture, or him starting to date. I don't know if it's exactly when he met my stepmother, because I know from him telling me he had been dating her for quite some time before she was introduced to us.
Same exact thing for me. I think that's, do you think it has something to do with jealousy maybe?
Oh yeah.
How old were you when they got married?
I was 12 when they got married.
Do you
Um,
remember the first instance of when the alienation really began?
Yeah. Well, in order to understand the alienation, you also have to understand that my stepmother, I think she knew exactly what she was doing when she put me on a diet.
She put you on a diet?
Yes. And so it wasn't that she put me on a diet. She started very, very soon. Like, she started making comments once we moved into her house about my weight. And we had tried Weight Watchers, we had tried things, and I'm 12, 13. I'm still in middle school, and making me feel bad about my weight. And I was being bullied at school for it already. I remember that she was making some comments about it, and it wasn't like your typical, like, oh, you need to lose some weight. It was, wouldn't you feel better if you lost some weight? And very much trying to make it seem like it's your decision, but it's a very pointed, manipulative question. And that became the theme of a lot of the questions that she asked me throughout the years I lived with them. And eventually, one New Year's, I decided I'm going to lose weight. And I remember seeing the look on Leslie and my father's face when I said that, and their faces just beamed with pride. And that's where my validation issues started to really come into play, because I needed to be validated by my decisions that I was making. And I didn't trust the decisions I was making. I went to a adult physical trainer who I think was underqualified to handle a minor's case of losing weight.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was given a 1,300 calorie a day diet.
Wow. That is probably half of what a kid that age needs.
I have done an exponential amount of research, and studies show that it's between 2,600 and 2,800. And keep in mind, I also did play sports like basketball at the time. I was in Taekwondo. I was an active child.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Like I am so sorry. That makes me so sad. I'm so sorry. That's so do you have or have you come to a conclusion of why they were so focused on your weight? I mean, so many kids have a little extra weight from their baby fat, and it comes off and it's nothing to worry about usually. And even if it is, you don't shame your child and try to, that's so wrong.
I think that there was this pressure on me to be the perfect kid. And that's also because I was the firstborn of my fathers. I was not the firstborn of my stepmothers. My stepmother had two adult children when she joined the marriage, and then one child that was about 6 months younger than me. But he was completely fit. Like, she was super skinny. And so there was definitely this I needed to fit in vibe. I need to fit in the club.
That makes perfect sense to me. Perfect sense.
That's
It really does.
just how I feel.
I totally get it. I totally get it. So you said that this stuff regarding your diet started with your stepmom, like around the time that after they got married.
Yes.
Did your mom know what was going on, and what was her reaction? Or your dad too? What was his reaction?
So that's kind of how the alienating started, because when I would go over to my mom's house, she thought that the diet was ridiculous and she would let me off it. And of course, being a kid that wants to eat freaking pizza, I would eat freaking pizza.
Yeah.
And so I'd gain weight when I was over at her house. And then I would get berated when I'd come back to my father or my stepmother's house for gaining the weight that I had, especially because I would gain so much weight in so little time. Like, it was not uncommon for me to gain 10 pounds in a week because that's how much I was eating over there. And that
You were
was a
starving.
big part of it. Yeah, I was starving. I was literally starving. And so, eventually it got to the point where they would just talk crap, your mom enables you, you're not applying yourself to the plan, because that's what they called it. They called it the plan was the name of the diet. And so then they would start sending groceries over to her house, and they would tell her that she needs to use these groceries. And we would flat out just let them rot in the freaking fridge. Like, because I didn't want to do it, because I think some core in me knew that something was wrong. And that's why I fought it, was because something in me knew that I didn't want to do this. And so eventually, like, they just kept ganging up on her every time I would gain weight. And I remember there was also a conversation about color guard, because my mom couldn't afford to pay for the color guard fees. So there was a possibility I was going to have to drop out. And I was so devastated. I talked to my father and my stepmother about it, and they were like, well, don't worry. You don't have to make the decision on whether we can afford color guard or not. If you really want color guard, we can make it happen because we're your parents. And kind of making themselves seem like puffing out their chests and stuff. And it continued to happen like that, where they would puff out their chests at different things that they were doing right and things that my mom was doing wrong. And my mom was continuing, like, when I would go over there and I'd be angry and I would say something, she would defend herself. And then she would also say, your father's to blame for all of this. And she would turn it back on him. And it was very much this back and forth tug of war between all of us. My stepmother became even more controlling as I got into high school, starting to control the clothes I wore, and the amount of makeup I could put on my body.
Yep. That's familiar to me.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? What was that like for you emotionally? Did you feel like you had a safe person to go to?
For my mother?
During that time that they were playing tug of war?
I felt like I had nobody. I felt like I was going insane. Like, that's the only way that I could describe it. It feels like your brain is rotting from the inside out.
I know how hard it is to be in such a deep depression when you're so young.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really sorry that you had to go through that, because I felt for a long, long time that I had no one like that too.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the alienation at that time, did you believe that you had one bad parent and one good parent, or was it more in the middle? What was your view on your parents?
I felt like my dad was the good parent because I felt like he was more organized. I did feel like my stepmom was the good advocate. I thought that she was advocating for me. Because I had seen where my mom could not literally afford something like color guard, And, being a kid, you only see that as unfair. You only see that, when you're 13, 14, you only see that as unfair. And so I saw them going to bat for me and making sure that I could do color guard as, oh, they care about me. They're good. They're good parents, So naturally, especially with that specific decision, really made me start to think, wow, they really do advocate for me. Maybe I should take this diet more seriously. And so I kind of started to gaslight myself and thinking, hey, maybe I should start doing this, you know? Um, and so at that point, I did start to think that, my father was the good one. My mother was, I think, good, but flawed. She was still good, but she was flawed.
Was there ever a time where you cut contact with either of them in that time?
When I was 14, my mother and I had a absolute blowout fight. And this was because I revealed what had happened to me during the divorce. I was molested by one of my mother's family friends' sons. And I revealed that to my father first because he was the one who had taken me to a therapy appointment. And my therapist said, you understand, because you're a minor, I'm a mandated reporter. I have to report this to your father. And I said, please don't. And she said, listen, the only way that you're going to be able to get out of this is if you tell him yourself. So when we got back in the car after therapy, I told him myself. And I remember he grabbed my arm and he was so sympathetic in that moment. And I honestly felt like things were going to get better because that was a piece of shame that had been digging on my heart. And especially because we were Jewish, so we believed a lot there was a lot of old views about virginity and pureness, especially taught in the synagogues. So, that's just a common theme with a lot of religions. But, with that theme, I was scared that I wasn't pure, that I wasn't good, and that this was going to follow me and shame me. And my mother flat out did not believe me.
Oh my God.
My
Wow.
mother said to me that she did not believe me. And in a fit of rage, and as an adult, I can reconcile that this was a fit of rage. In a fit of rage, I told her I want to kill myself. And she, because she was so angry she couldn't think clearly, said, go ahead.
Mm. Okay. Wow. That is like the worst response I think that you could ever have to your child coming to you with the most vulnerable thing that's happened to them in their life thus far. Wow. It's just, if it was a fit of rage, it was a justifiable fit of rage. No one deserves that, and I can understand why you'd want to go no contact after that.
After that, that was a Sunday. The next Monday, because it was my father's week, um, he picked me up and I told him right there in the car, my brother was in the back seat. I told him to put his headphones on so that he could listen to his music so he didn't have to hear the conversation. And I told my father, I was like, I want to move in permanently.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was the catalyst. But that is what started the further alienation because I told my stepmother and she was like, that's horrible. She was very sympathetic. But then the weekend before it was supposed to be my mother's week, they made a point to say, now your mom's going to text you tomorrow and she's going to tell you that it's her week and you have to go with her, but you don't have to go with her. And as an adult, I can now recognize that was some very pointed language that was used. My mother was not going to try and take me, but that was the impression I was getting. That was the fear that was driven into me. So when my mother texted me on that Monday and just said, hey, where are you? I'm here to pick you up. I took it as a kidnapping attempt.
A lot of people might not understand that, but I do. They take things out of proportion and incite fear in you where no fear would ever exist naturally. So it sounds like you were really stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like, what do you do in that decision, in that situation? So you decided to move in with your dad. How old were you? 14?
I was 14. Mm-hmm.
So just before we get back to what goes after that, what happened after that, what was their relationship with your brother? Like, how did he handle all this? Was he still going with your mom, and was he
Mm-hmm.
accepted that more in the family, or was he ever alienated too?
So my brother's kind of an interesting case because my brother also chose my father and has been alienated from me for 8 years. So that's an interesting kind of story on that. But we'll get to that. I'm sure we'll get to that.
Okay, so I'll just slow down.
But my brother was also very young. He's 4 years younger than me. And so I'm 14, he's 10, and he also has autism. So he doesn't have very severe autism. He has very mild autism, but there are things that sometimes I don't think he fully understands. And I don't think he fully grasped at the time what was going on. But he just knew that he was going to go back and forth and that I wasn't going to go with him. And that's all he really needed to know. And that's kind of how it was explained to him.
How long were you living with just your dad and your stepmom, and what was that like to live with them and not, was it full no contact with your mom, no texting, no talking?
It was tumultuous, and it was about a year and a half of living in an absolute hellhole. Um, I am very lucky that I got sent away to boarding schools.
Yes,
I'm
I
so fucking lucky.
I feel the same way. I'm
I as awful as the schools were, I am so lucky.
You know, it's really bad when you're sent away to like treatment or boarding school and you don't want to go back home.
Yeah, yeah.
Explain to me, if you can, if you're willing to go into that, what happened during that time that was so
It was so much control. It was so much control. The pretty much from the moment I signed the paper, it was like they controlled everything, and I was this little puppet now. And I had to also play this game of mirror with them. Whenever we were talking about my mother, I had to mirror back whatever emotions that they were feeling. Suddenly, it became unsafe for my mother to come to my color guard performances. Maybe it's not the best idea, sweetie, was a common phrase. If I had a bad meeting with my mother, it was, oh, well, maybe you should take a break from seeing your mother for a couple weeks. It was very much a back and forth. I was still seeing her off and on, but it was never consistent. And the first thing that started it was I actually sent her a scathing email explaining some of the things that she was doing. And I will agree, looking back at that email, because my mom actually sent it to me semi recently, just so I could look it over. And when I looked it over, I was like, okay, some of these grievances, I can see where I came from at the time because I understand why I felt that way. But these are definite overreactions to some of my mother's behaviors. And I agree that my mother has some behaviors that she needs to work on, but everybody does. But it was every time my mother made a mistake, it was always really big. And it was always something that was going on. There was so much control over my food. I used to get cheat days with the diet. Like I would get a cheat day a week where I could eat one meal of whatever the hell I wanted. When I moved in, the cheat days went away.
This is so messed up. I can't tell you, like, I'm sure you know how messed up this is, but how
Yeah.
this has to have like altered your relationship with your body, with food, with everything.
Oh yeah. Oh hell yeah. I'll be honest, like half the reason why I get the tattoos that I do is because it helps me to not be so ashamed of my body, because it was that fear of my weight, of the weight gain, of the scale still haunts me to this day. I can't step on a scale.
Yeah.
I'm 26 years old and I can't step on a scale. I can't step on a scale.
That's so, it's like you were in a prison, a certain type of prison.
It felt like one. And one of the things that I did for myself during this time was, especially because my father also spent a lot more time with my stepmother than he did me. I think that they acknowledged my pain, but they were very quick to push me into therapy when I really just wanted to connect with them about it. I really wanted for them to say, hey, yeah, that was fucked up, but we can still fix this. Like, here's what we can do. Like, maybe you need to explain things to your mom. I wanted that from them. But when I got the therapy response, and especially the psychiatric response of, hey, you might need to take antidepressants, that was another thing too. And my mom was totally not on board with that. She was like, why are you putting her on SSRIs? These are not good medications for children. What are you doing? And, their whole thing was, it's a low dose. Stop freaking out. Well, low doses have still caused issues in adolescents' brains.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Low doses don't stay at low doses because you have to increase the dose because you get used to the amount of medicine you're on.
Yeah. And so I started to get attention from some of the boys because now that I was skinny and I was liked, I started to get attention. And so now that I was getting some of this attention, I will fully admit I was wanting a lot of boys' attention. And my father had made it very clear to me that I could not date 2 years my senior or older.
Okay.
So if I'm a freshman, I can't date a junior or a senior. If I'm a sophomore, I can't date a senior. And so, but I started to like this guy that was a junior and I was a freshman.
Mm-hmm.
And started to date him. Then they found out about him and they cracked down hard on me. We kind of went through this whole like we can't trust you thing, but it kind of went away after a couple months. Then I started to become involved romantically with somebody at my synagogue, who one of the people's at my synagogue's sons. And I will fully admit that was total puppy love, but it was my first love. And when they found out that I had, quote unquote, lied to them again, they shut me down from him, completely cut me off from him entirely. I wasn't allowed to speak to him. I wasn't allowed to message him, email him, letter, nothing. Straight no contact, even though we had the same synagogue together. And their reason that they gave me at the time was because Leslie had a relationship with the boy's mother at the synagogue, and they needed to have a copacetic relationship to make the synagogue run, and I was a threat to that.
This is next level.
So,
like, wow.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I was 15. I was so brokenhearted, and I did everything to try and get back in contact with this boy. I tried everything. I had friends. I had memorized his phone number. I had friends call him for me just so I could hear his voice. I had somebody try to deliver a letter for me. They failed. I had somebody try to text him for me. We were both in marching band. I tried to meet up with him at one of the marching band meets, just tried everything. But every time I would get caught, and every time there was an even worse consequence. I got my phone taken away, my laptop taken away. I wasn't able to call even my mother during that time when I was grounded like this.
Oh.
At one point, they even took my color guard away. They said, you're not going to this color guard meeting. And they knew that if I didn't go to the color guard meeting, I wasn't going to be allowed to perform in the performance that weekend. They fully knew that, and they knew how it was going to devastate me, but they did it anyway. And then the last time that I tried to contact the boy, they said, if you do it again, we're going to move you to a different school and you're going to have to start all over.
Wow.
I tried to run away. I won't lie. I tried to run away. I packed myself a duffel bag full of winter clothes, enough provisions that I thought for 6 months that I could live off of. Naive, watching Nicholas Sparks movie kind of like things that I thought that would be good. And I had no idea what the real world would actually bring, but I did try to run away. And I actually remember I had made a plan to leave after school and to skip my last class of the day so that I had about a 45-minute head start on where I was going to go. And I was crossing the boundary of my school to the sidewalk, and I froze. And I said, I can't do this. And I walked back into my class. I said, sorry, I'm late. I made up like an excuse in the moment, just put up for that last class, put my duffel bag back in my locker, tried to pretend it didn't happen, and then went back to my father's house that night.
What, if anything, could have helped you during that time?
That's a really good question. And honestly, I don't know if anything could have, because I feel like my mother was having some issues too. She was having some thyroid issues, which was causing her hormones to have some major imbalances. So she was having some pretty hysterical fits of crying and was a little unstable at the time. And my father wasn't great either. Honestly, I think it would have been best if I had gone to live with another family member. If I had gotten away from all of it.
I often think the same thing. And you were talking about boarding school. What age was that your decision to go to boarding school, or did they?
Yeah. No. So they found out that I had contacted the boy again, and they were going to take me to Paris for my 16th birthday because I was doing so good and I was finally adhering to their rules again. At 15, I attempted suicide. When that happened, I got sent to another school. I got caught talking to the boy again. I was told that I was going to go to Paris for my 16th birthday. And then I got caught talking to the boy again. And they said, you're not going to Paris for your 16th birthday. You're going to the woods. And they sent me to a wilderness camp called Outward Bound.
Oh my God.
I was out there in the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada for 28 days. I encountered a bear, a porcupine, and a beaver.
What the heck? What do you mean the waters? Were you in like a river outside in the woods?
Yes, like we had a canoe that we would carry on our back with packs, and we had to hike between 5 to 8 miles a day.
Oh my God.
And
Oh,
there was a period of 3 days in that 28 where they put us all at various different points on this lake. And we were all separated for 3 days and only given enough rations for 3 days.
no,
Yes. Yes.
This is like Hunger Games. No,
Yes.
no.
I swear to God, I felt like I was in the Hunger Games.
Still go on? Does this still go on?
So yeah, and I mean, so after the woods, we finally made it back to base camp after 25 days of being out there in the woods. Mosquitoes, like I wish I still had the picture of me. I went in with this white long sleeve shirt because in Minnesota it gets down to the 60s in the summer at the time because climate change had really started to wreck the world until now. Um, and when it was like low 70s, high 60s during the day, most of the days. So I wore a long sleeve white t-shirt. By the time I came out, the whole thing was brown.
Let me back up. So this is, oh my gosh. Okay, so like this is just, it's familiar to me. It's like one trauma after another, after another, after another, after another, and you have to laugh about it, right? Like my friends always.
I'm only uncomfortable laughing, I swear.
Yeah, no, I get the same way. Like people are like, why are you laughing about this? And I'm like, I don't know if, but okay. So did they first of all, did you know you were going to this place? And if so, like, what did your dad and your stepmom tell you about why you were going and how long you would be there and what it would be like? Like, was there it was simply for talking to this boy?
Basically, it was for talking to this boy, for lying, for continuing to lie. And I remember them saying, until you can learn to be honest, we're going to employ other means to try and teach you. And I remember hearing the words that it was a punishment.
Wow.
For my 16th birthday. And I spent my 16th birthday out there in the woods. The girls
I spent my 16th birthday in treatment.
Yeah. And it's so sad because you build up your 16th birthday to be this big grand thing and you never got it.
So did your mom What was your mom's stance on all of this? Was she okay with sending you to the wilderness?
No. So after my attempt, my mom was completely cut off from me. My father cited, I think I remember that my father cited that I was too emotionally fragile at the time to continue working on a relationship with my mother. And that's why they said, hey, we're going to take a pause on this right now. And it's always, we're going to take a pause, or we're going to pause this right now, or we'll come back to it, blah, blah, blah. But I remember after my attempt, my mother actually came to the hospital with some flowers right after work. So she's in her scrubs. I immediately see her because I know my mom's hair. Like, I immediately see her and I start panicking in the psych ward. Now, keep in mind, I'm at a very fragile emotional state, and I start freaking out and start going start crying and hyperventilating basically. I was so ashamed of what I had done because my mother had always told me I'm such a gift. She wasn't supposed to have children. I'm such a gift to the world. And she made me promise when I was really depressed at 12 that I was never going to try and hurt myself. And that promise was ringing in my ears that I had broken that. And so I, of course, had a mental freaking breakdown in the psych ward because I was now going to have to confront my mother with the fact that I had broken my promise. So my mom didn't even, I don't think my mom knew until I was already gone to Wilderness that I was gone. And I remember how, honestly, the Wilderness was actually a really good experience. Like, as crazy as it sounds, it was peaceful, and it gave me a love of camping that I always will love. I love being out in nature now. I have a border collie just because I want to be able to take my dog out camping with me, and so we have a camping dog. We're trying to get a camper soon, but we'd love to camp. And so those 28 days were rough, but they were so necessary, and it kind of was what I think was the moment to kind of get me away from everything and get some clarity on some things. But before I had left for Wilderness, on the plane out there, this also shows you just how sneaky I could be. I was so sneaky to the point where I had begged somebody on my flight out to Wilderness if I could borrow their phone and call the boy one last time before I was sent away.
So smart though.
I mean, I gotta hand it to myself. I had a brain on me, okay?
What was your view on going there? Were you trying to do everything you could to not go, or had they convinced you it was your idea and you were along for the ride? Or something else?
I kind of had this defeated after my suicide attempt. I definitely will admit I was a lot more defeated. I felt more like this is going to happen to me whether I like it or not. They're my parents. I don't really have a choice. I knew I had an escort that was going to be on the plane with me. So I was like, fuck, I really don't have a choice here. So either I fight them and I'm going to lose a lot of my energy and I'm going to lose, or I go willingly and we can just get this over with as fast as possible. The program I was with Outward Bound, I want to remember the name of it because it was a specific program for only troubled teens. And I remember the girls that I were with, one of them had gone to juvie because she had killed her little sister's bully.
Oh my God.
And one girl was 14 and was living in Las Vegas, and she was selling drugs. And she was like making thousands of dollars selling cocaine. And there was another girl who was like very promiscuous, and it was just a lot of girls who had some sincere problems. And I remember when they turned to me and they said, well, what's your problem? And I kind of told them like my whole story, kind of like I'm telling you now. And they're like, that's it.
And
You've only kissed a boy. You haven't even done anything.
you
And
didn't
keep in mind,
long there.
no, I had never had any kind of sexual relations that involved, like, I had not gone past first base with any boy. I had never drank, never smoked, never done any kind of illegal drug. I was also a B average student. So
Wow.
by all accounts, I was a good kid.
What was your self-perception like during that time?
I was very low on myself, very low self-esteem, self-confidence. Um, Another thing that I want to just touch back on, something, a point that I forgot to talk about earlier when we were talking about the diet. At one point, I became starving so bad, and this is something that they never caught me on, and but it shows you the lengths that I had to go through. At one point, I would sneak down so early in the mornings that I could steal quarters out of the coin jar so I could go to the vending machine and get myself a candy bar. And not only would I steal quarters out of the coin thing, I was so scared of the coins making noise in my purse that I would tuck them at different points in my bra to make sure that they didn't touch so that I could go to school without any of the coins jingling anywhere on me. So they had no idea what was going on.
That makes me so sad.
It's hard to think about. It's sad that I ever had to do that.
And you didn't think that you could go to your mom, right?
Well, I was living with them permanently. They had told me about the custody and that I was now theirs. And I thought that those things were final from the way that they took me into the lawyer's office to sign. And I remember the lawyer looking at me and saying, "You realize this is permanent." And here's something that I think is kind of interesting. And I don't remember much from that day, but I remember the lawyer asking me, "Are you sure?" And him kind of giving me that one eyebrow look like, "I can tell you're not sure. So speak up." But I very quickly looked at my stepmom, looked back, and started nodding very excitedly, yes.
Wait, it's making it sound like it was your decision, but weren't you underage?
I was 14 when I was signed away. In the state of Georgia, I was the legal age where I can sign over where I want to live. I don't remember what it's called, but I know it's an affidavit of some sort. But I had to go into a lawyer's office to actually get this signed by this lawyer.
Wow. Looking back, do you recall anyone from family or friends trying to intervene? Or did anyone notice that things were not right? Did your friends think something was up?
The thing was is that I had friends, but I didn't have any close friends. And that was because both neither my mother nor my father allowed me to have friends over after middle school. Especially because a lot of my friends were guys. So they would never let me have those over. And I didn't get along with a lot of girls. I got along with some of the older girls, but we didn't always want to talk about our problems and we didn't want to talk about like things like that. And I wanted to be perceived as the fun friend. So I didn't talk about that a lot. And I kept a lot to myself too, because a recurring theme through my life was fear and not being validated. And the last thing I wanted was that to happen in those friendships too.
So, what was the result of the wilderness camp? What did your friends find out that you went there? Or what, and what was the result on you emotionally, developmentally? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know that had to be in trauma. Like we were saying before, trauma on top of trauma, just added trauma. But you, at the same time,
Yeah,
you did say that it was better than being at home, essentially, right?
it was
So
better than being at home.
I think that must surprise a lot of people to hear.
Yeah. And it's also funny when I describe wilderness too, because like I said, I've encountered a bear in wilderness, I encountered a beaver and a porcupine, and those were all very scary for very different reasons. But it was good because it gave me some clarity. It also kind of gave me some perspective because as awful it was to compare myself to the other girls I was there with, it made me realize, no, I'm not a bad kid. I'm not. I'm not. I'm literally not. And you know, my mental state was also very angry at the time. And I think that this is going to sound very strange, but with my attempt, I think a part of me did die. I think a part of me did die that day. And that was the catalyst to kind of help me to get to where I am because I think it was the psych ward that recommended boarding schools after.
Wow.
And, you know, I went to a secondary school. I went back to a normal high school after the psych ward, but it was psych ward, new high school, wilderness, boarding school. And after the wilderness, I was kind of proud for what I had done. I had gone out there for 28 days and carried an 80-pound canoe on my back and carried 50-pound packs. And I was weak. I was tired. I was so exhausted. I had been face to face with a black bear. I had, you know, gotten less lost. I had fallen down a river. I had done all of these things and I had made it through. And it was an accomplishment for me at the time. And at the time, also, before I left for wilderness, I had to cut off all of my old friends from high school. They said, you are having to start anew. So you are no longer allowed to talk to anyone. We're deleting your Facebook because this is 2012 when Facebook was first kicking off. They're like, we're deleting your Facebook, we're deleting your email. None of your friends can get in contact with you.
They alienated more than just your mom.
Yeah, I was isolated, plain and clear, isolated. And so I got sent out to the wilderness, and honestly, I loved it. But the boy that I was in love with, that very silly man, decided it was going to be a good idea to get in contact with my mother because he had somehow gotten in contact with my mother. I still, to this day, have no idea how he did. Mm-hmm. He got in contact with my mother, who got in contact with my father. And so my father put 2 and 2 together that I had called him on the plane on the way. And so because of that, they saw it as another infraction and they sent me away to Greenbrier Academy for Girls.
You think that parents would be excited to have their kid be coming back home?
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah. So
no,
I'm really sorry. And it seems like in the long run, though, that might have been a better option for you. Was it? How was the time at was it called Greenbrier?
Greenbrier Academy for Girls. We called it GBA.
Where was it? And how many?
It's in Penn Springs, West Virginia. I was there for a year. It was bad at some points, but good in others. And one thing I will say that has saved my ass is the friendships I have made. I am still friends to this day with a lot of the girls I was close with at both of the schools. One of the things that was bad, though, is in the wilderness, because you're out there in the woods and you don't have any refrigeration, what do you think that they're going to feed you when you're out in the woods? Lots of carbs. So I gained an exponential amount of weight out in the woods, like 20 pounds I gained. And I remember that was a total travesty. Like it was completely like they were saying like, how could you gain weight? You were doing all this physical activity. We don't understand. That happened. And they forced the first school I went to continue the diet.
They were able to do that? The school was compliant?
Yes. I have those records. I actually got my records from the school. They kept a food log of what I ate every single day. There's 586 pages. I've found that there's a lot of correlations between a lot of these owners. They own so many different programs across the country that have been shut down and reopened under different names, rebranded. LJ Mitchell was the owner of Greenbrier Academy for Girls. It has since been shut down due to issues for liability insurance. Don't know why it shut down because of liability insurance, but that's all I know because with the official releasement statement. But I do know that LJ Mitchell's other programs have been shut down, especially when one kid died. That's for sure.
Boarding school. So you're at boarding school. What effect did that have?
The boarding school was actually great because I got to make friends in a much closer knit setting. But like I said, I started to gain weight. And of course, because the school was, a school and they had to feed a large amount of girls, they bought whatever they could that was cheapest. So we were having lots of pasta, lots of pizza, lots of starchy carbs. And so because of that, I continued to gain weight. And after that, they re-implemented the diet at the school. They took away my outings. So I wasn't allowed to leave campus until I got my weight down. I wasn't allowed to participate. One of the things that I loved about Greenbrier is that they had a very holistic outlook on the way they viewed healing. They had drumming every single day, African djembe drumming, where we sung a song at 12 p.m. every single day, and we would play these African fusions. Funga was one, which is a very common song, I believe, from West Africa. And it is just a really interesting thing. We had a performance group, and so we kind of use these almost shamanistic techniques in therapy. And we had this thing called the village. And the village was this yurt at the very top of the property on the mountain. And they had this therapist, this special therapist that would come in for this 1 week like workshop with the girls. And we would do a sweat lodge where we would make a literal sweat lodge. And we had death arrow ceremonies where we would cast away our pain into the fire. And we would, when it,
So were all these rituals like, was it just do you think that it helped you bond with the girls or helped
yes. Yes. And I mean, it's so ridiculous, but it worked. But I mean, it was so otherworldly and spiritual. And I've always been a very free spirited person. So it gave me a perspective that I didn't have before. And I had already kind of delved into Wicca and paganism and some of the other things. And that also caused some discourse in the family. But that just absolutely made me sure that I was not born to be Jewish. I was born to follow something else. And it definitely kind of reaffirmed some of my own beliefs about what I believed that the one or God or whatever you want to call it is. And it helped me to bond with the girls because so many of the other girls at this school were not bad kids. They had experienced some extremely traumatic things. There was, a girl who had, watched her father pass away. There was a couple of girls who had some serious issues with eating disorders. There was a girl who had several abortions. There was a lot of sadness around a lot of the girls too. And I was kind of happy to be in a place where even though we were all sad, we all had pain that was similar and we all were able to share it and to work to heal it. We also had at GBA, we had parent workshops as well, where the parents would come in and we would do these workshops. My father and my stepmother decided after one that they weren't for them and that they weren't the problem I was.
Seems like they decided that like the moment that you came into her life. I'm so sorry.
So they refused to come after that. They took me away from the sweat lodges, so I couldn't do a sweat lodge anymore. I couldn't go because they said that it wasn't good for my health, that it wasn't good for my blood pressure. I'm like, okay. I think the sweating is actually good for me. Thank you very much. But
they were controlling everything from afar.
Yeah. Controlling literally everything from afar. I also have a letter from the school where my stepmother asked at this first parent workshop to have my therapist write a written statement saying it was not in my psychological best interest to have my mother in my life. She wanted her to have this letter and thank the gods that my therapist at the school refused.
If that's not clear parental alienation, I don't know what is.
I also have that. I have that piece of paper. And that was so healing to see.
Wow. I'm so glad you have that piece of paper.
Me too. As horrible as it was to go through my notes and to see it and to kind of re-traumatize myself a little again, it was great to see some proof of what I had been wondering for most of my life.
When you gaslight yourself so much, it's good to have that proof.
Mm-hmm. And I thank the gods to my friends at the school who told me, get your records. They will delete them at the legal limit of 6 years. You have to get them now. And so I listened to my friend, I got them, and now the school is closed down. I am so lucky that I did not wait. Further, the control just kept happening. I kept myself busy though. I started to get myself involved with, we had an animal rehabilitation program for horses, dogs, and cats. And so I got really involved with that because if I figured, you know what, if I am only going to be allowed off campus when I play sports, then I'm going to involve myself as much as I can on campus. And so I started taking care of the dogs, started training, and it was a lot of fun. I cycled through two therapists because eventually the therapists got to the point where I think they got annoyed with my stepmother and my stepfather. And then finally, we got to this badass therapist, and we'll call him John. Now, John was a no bullshit type. He called them on their shit. He called me on my shit. And there were lots of sessions where I would end up cursing at him because I was like, fuck you, you're right, I hate you. But he was a good therapist in that aspect. And that's when like the tide started to turn at the school. Suddenly, John was starting to allow me to break the rules that my father and my stepmother had put on me at the school. He was my therapist. And so one of the things that he loved to do is we would have like group therapy with all of the girls who had the same therapist. And he decided one summer, I was like, I really want to get out of town. Like, I want to just like drive around because I loved being in the car. He was like, okay, girls, let's all get in the Jeep. He had a Jeep. And so he was like, all of us, let's get in the Jeep. You know, it's fine. It's all of us together. You know, nothing's going to happen. And yeah, it's kind of a little creepy still, but I'm like, you know what? Kind of cool.
He probably saw exactly what was happening, or most of what was happening. It seems like he would see through the facade of your stepmom and your dad.
Yeah. He stepped in as a father when my father wasn't, as a therapist. And that's kind of a weird thing to admit out loud, but he did. Towards the end of my stay with Greenbrier, I was invited back home only one time. And that was for my brother's bar mitzvah. Cliff Notes version, I was abandoned at 17. But I will,
like, is that when they, can you explain that?
So I went from Greenbrier Academy for Girls to Aldrin Academy for Girls. I got in trouble there. And towards the end of my stay at Aldrin Academy, the headmaster decided to throw me out. They decided I wasn't safe enough to come home. And they left me in a sublease in Chapel Hill, North Carolina with no transportation, $200 to my name, a box of ramen, a clothes and a garbage bag, a comforter, a pair of sheets, my guitar, and I had no way to get to my job, no way to support myself, and they just left me there, and I was 17.
How is that legal?
I really wish I had called the cops on them at the time. I really wish I had.
Parents still have custody of you? How could they do that?
I don't know. I think it was because I was legally graduated from high school. But the thing is at Aldrin Academy was in North Carolina. North Carolina state law does not mean that you are emancipated once you get your high school diploma. Georgia law does. So, but the thing is because my residency was in North Carolina, the laws aren't the same. I don't know how that worked. I don't know how that worked, why that was allowed to happen. I don't know.
Do you think they were in contact with your parents before they did that? I mean, with your stepmom and your dad before they did that?
Oh, absolutely.
So they were aware that was going to happen?
My father and my stepmother set up the sublease.
Oh my God. I thought that they would have no idea about that. Oh my God.
My father and my stepmother set up the sublease for me. But going back to Greenbrier, towards the end of my stay and the Israel trip, my brother, I came back home only that one time. And before that, I had actually gotten in trouble for calling my mother on Mother's Day, my biological mother, because I had used my one phone call to call my mother and not my stepmother. And my mother had not heard my voice in 8 months at that point. And I remember she answered the phone with her normal hello. And I go, "Hey, Mom, it's me." And she just paused for a second and goes, just the gasp. I can still hear the gasp. And she started crying, and it was Mother's Day, and my mom's birthday is May 13th. So it was also her birthday that Mother's Day. So it was a double whammy. And I made sure to call her. And when we hung up the phone, my mother had contacted my father and said, "What do you mean she doesn't want to talk to me? She just called me." Which she didn't realize was going to get me in trouble with my father, but it did. I was at Greenbrier getting ready to come home for Israel. They chose to graciously forgive me for that infraction and let me see my mother at my brother's bar mitzvah. Um, it was kind of an awkward situation. Then we went to Israel, but there was a situation with the calculator that happened after Israel. And this is something that kind of shows their control. One of the things that we had said in our um, homestay agreement, because at the school you had to have a homestay agreement of the rules that you're going to follow before you go. And I had laid out my rules that, hey, if I want to take anything home, I will make sure to ask you, can I take it with me? Well, I had asked for a couple of different things and they were like, yeah, sure, no problem. You can take that home. And so I was looking through my side table, and I noticed that I had my calculator there. And it was a TI-84 calculator, the one that you use in school. I was like, oh shit, I need this. So thinking nothing of it, I just stuffed it in between my clothes because I'm about to go on a plane to get back to West Virginia. I don't want my carry-on being thrown around and my calculator breaking. So of course my father comes into my room and he starts going through my bag and he finds the calculator. And I'm like, what's the big deal? It's a calculator. I need it for math. And he's like, but you didn't ask. You made it a point not to ask. And you asked for all these other things, but you didn't ask for this. That was intentional, blah, blah, blah. And put the blame on me. And I remember they went on and on about this goddamn calculator for fucking weeks about how it was an intentional slight. I was trying to be dishonest. I was this, that, and the other. I wasn't going anywhere. I keep telling them that I'm improving, but I'm not actually doing the work. Just all of those things over and over again. That, my apology was a snow job, was a well-rehearsed monologue. And that one really broke me. And eventually after that, I just gave in. I said, yeah, you're right. I took the calculator. I was being manipulative. Sure. I was broken. I wasn't gonna win, and I knew I wasn't gonna win. John really went to bat for me though, and he actually broke the school's rules on more than one occasion, and he made my last couple of weeks at Greenbrier wonderful. And in those last few weeks, he also gave me internet access. So what did I do in those few weeks I had internet access?
The boy, you contacted the boy.
Of course I did. Of course I did. Because I'm a hopeless romantic. And when I contacted the boy, it turns out he missed me as much as I missed him.
Oh.
And this is gonna sound so cheesy, but he proposed to me over fucking email.
Oh my gosh. That sounds
We ended up breaking up after all of this, but that was the hope that I needed. That was my light at the end of the tunnel. That was my light. I knew that I was 17 now, getting ready to leave Greenbrier. I was like, I just have to make it 1 year, 365 days.
Yeah.
I can do this.
Yeah.
And I just kept reminding myself, it's just 365. It's just 365. It's just 365. And I was very glad. I'm very, very grateful to him that he was that light shining for me in the dark. I don't think that I would have held on. I think that I would have turned to some very self-destructive means once I got out, had I not had a light at the end of the tunnel.
It's beautiful. So when you
Thanks.
that after Aldern Academy, you get sent to Chapel Hill.
So I get sent from Greenbrier Academy to Aldern Academy. I was in Aldern Academy for a little less than a year. And At first it was fine. They took me off the diet. They said, do what the hell you want. You're 17. We can't control all your decisions. I immediately began rapidly gaining weight. But while I was at Aldern, I noticed that there was definitely a different vibe to Aldern. I went to Aldern, and when we're there, I realized that this was a much stricter school. This was a much different school. They didn't have at Greenbrier, they had people who helped clean the the facility. We would have chores, but there were still people who helped to maintain the facility. At Aldern, we were maintenance. Like, we were the maids, we were the dishwashers, we were the cooks, we were everything. Um, and it was very much, it was almost like military style, very rigid, and some of the rules were so ridiculous. Um, if you got put on 5 foot, or I don't remember what they called no talking, but there was a punishment where you weren't allowed to talk to people. And all you could do was write, like, can I go to the bathroom? And somebody would have to stand outside the bathroom. When you got in real trouble, you were put on something called refocus. That's what they called it. And you were asked to put all of your clothes and belongings into like a wilderness pack and parade around the facility like you're being on a shame march in the rain, and you'd have to take laps around the facility while the rest of the community ate, had lunch, went to class, did all of those things. And you were not allowed to talk. And if you were on refocus, you weren't allowed to talk to people, you weren't allowed to wave at people, you weren't allowed to smile, you weren't allowed to be more than 5 feet away from anybody at all times. You had to cook your food out on a fire outside. There was, you lost everything, all of your privileges. And a lot of the girls that were put on refocus were put on for things that I agree maybe aren't the best things. Like, girls would hook up, of course. It's an all girls facility. It's bound to happen. But they would get so punished that they were scared to do it again. And I remember one of my friends there said that if you know a secret, you have to tell it. Otherwise, you're on refocus too.
Absolute control of all information.
So ignorance was bliss. Oh my gosh. And they read your letters. You weren't allowed to say anything bad about the facility.
What's your impression of your emotional and mental state at that time?
I was so angry, but I was like a storm I was like a storm waiting. I was very nice, and I knew the game now. I was old enough and mature enough to know that there was a game that was being played, and I knew how to play it. And because I had been so long playing it and also trying to gain their trust and try to still have some independence, I realized, I was like, I'm never going to get what I want out of this. My only hope is turning 18. And so I just learned to play the game, and I continue on doing my sneaky snide shit whenever I could.
I don't blame you for having all that anger. God, I would be so angry if I were in that position. So what was turning 18 and graduating like?
So I actually graduated a year and a half early. I'm really proud of that still, because when I attempted I was a straight F student, but I graduated early. And at Aldern, they had what's called an EDGE program, which is where it was kind of like a adult on the way out program.
Yeah.
I had an apartment, I had a job, I went to community college, things like that. They continued to control everything.
Oh.
I could not go and be in a boy's car. Like, they sent me a list of rules of I couldn't go to anybody's house. I couldn't have study halls in people's houses. I could only go to coffee shops or the library. There were very specific rules that I had to follow. I had to have a meal plan budget. I had to do so many different things, and they still controlled everything, including my electronic use and, if I could contact boys or not. that was the first time I got in trouble. Was I had gone on the Edge program, and I had now just gotten back an iPhone for the first time, and I was like, heck yeah, I can connect to the internet with this. So what did I do? I
Oh no.
contacted the boy. And of course, because I had to turn in my electronics every night and I was not smart enough to think about wiping the history, I got caught. And I got in so much trouble, man. But I was graduated high school. I was technically supposed to be like an on the way out adult, but I still didn't understand, like, why was there so much control still? If you want me to be independent, let me be independent.
Were all of the kids your age or young adults your age controlled in the same manner? Could they not have boyfriends either? Or was it just you?
No, it was just me.
So
There was
it
a
was your
girl.
parents' rules then? It wasn't the actual school's rules?
No, there was my roommate in this Edge program. We shared an apartment. She had one half, I had the other half. Um, she had a boyfriend that was a cook at the job that we both had. We were both hostesses at the Carolina Brewery.
So it was just you they controlled in this way.
Yes.
Do you believe it was your
I'm
parents?
yes, I'm so sure it was them. And well, because I also have the emails. I have the emails because I was copied on them. We have to be ready. And I think for me was defining my purpose, defining that I'm more than just my pain,
Yeah.
and that my pain may have shaped me, but one thing I that they can never take away from me is my faith and my hope and the fact that I am a good person. They still have they've done terrible things to me even after I got abandoned in Chapel Hill. They, got me kicked out of a wedding, and they've done so many things to separate me as the scapegoat of the family. They've spread lies that I have borderline personality disorder, which is not true. I've been diagnosed with PTSD,
True.
you
Yeah.
know?
I'm so sorry. All of this is very familiar sounding to me. So I know how hard it's been to deal with this crazy making, and then they turn the perpetrator and victim upside down and make other people see you through this lens of darkness, pretty much, which in retrospect is the same lens that we were seeing our
Mm-hmm.
parents. So gosh, so much to process. So how long were you in Chapel Hill? When did the Edge program end? And what were you studying? And how long were you in Chapel Hill after that?
So I became a CNA once I joined the Edge program after graduating high school. It was like a 6-month program, and I left um, Aldrin Academy for good May 31st, 2015. And I remember that because it was also my brother's birthday. And I remember going to that sublease. And I'll be honest, I was elated to be in a sublease, to be on my own, to not have to worry about like who's going to find out about what I'm doing. It doesn't matter now. I'm an adult now. Like, I'm acting as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also very naive. And one of the things I did was, once I got there and I kind of realized that I'm not sure I can do this on my own, I called my mom. And my mom picked up. And while I was at Aldern, we had a somewhat of a relationship. It was kind of weird. It was still back and forth, and it was very guarded on both sides, because every time that I was in a call with my mother, my therapist was in the room. It wasn't like a one-on-one conversation. It was always on speaker. So I never felt really comfortable connecting with my mom again. But when I was abandoned, I connected with her immediately. And I said, Mom, can you come get me? And she came.
Oh, wow.
I remember that freedom ride home. We were traveling through Asheville, and she asked me, she was like, "Do you want to take a detour?" And I said, "Sure." But once I came back from Aldern, and I had escaped the boarding schools, came back with my mother, my father berated me for it. He said I abandoned my lease and I was being reckless. And I also quit my antidepressants cold turkey. And I threw those in the trash. And I have not picked up a antidepressant since.
Good for
I'm
you.
very proud of that.
Good.
And
Say that people don't need them sometimes and that they can help for
sure.
sure. But
Well,
I'm a big
and some people
proponent
have
of,
chemical imbalances, right?
yeah, but I'm a big
And
proponent of, if you don't need it, you don't need it.
there have been times where I've considered it. There have been times where I've had rough weeks where I've absolutely considered it. But then something always happens that brings me back. And I go, you know what? It's okay. This ebbs and it flows. Once I came back though, my father immediately started attacking my mother, and my mother started attacking my father. And I was living at home. I had gone to college for a year, and the control continued even in college. They made me sign up for student loans, even though I had a scholarship, even though I had a college Illinois account to pay for my college.
Oh, wait, so okay, were you living with your mom? Or are you living with
So
him?
I came back to live with my mother at 17. But at 18, I decided I wanted to go away to college because I actually wanted to pursue a career in psychology. So I went to Georgia Southern. And when I went to Georgia Southern, they said, hey, your scholarship and your Georgia Illinois isn't going to cover this. So you need to get a student loan for your on campus housing.
Mhm.
So I did, not thinking anything of it, not thinking of the long term ramifications of student loan debt.
Yeah.
And so I lived on campus and I made some great friendships that I actually still have to this day, also from college. Um, but ultimately, I ended up dropping out because something happened with my brother. I was in college and I remember being in the bathroom and coming out and seeing I had a flip phone at the time because it's all I could afford. And seeing on my phone, I had like 12 missed calls from my brother and a whole bunch of text messages from him saying, help me, help me.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh my God. And so I started blowing up his phone, started blowing up, blowing up, blowing up. And then my father called me and he said, there was an incident with your mother at Scott's school. And, there was something that happened, but don't worry, Scott's fine. He'll be fine. I was like, okay. But immediately, because my father had said something about my mother, I'm like, what the is going on? So I call my mother immediately, and she's been crying because you can hear it on the phone. And
Mhm.
she said, Lauren, he signed away my rights too.
Wait, what?
Just,
Why did
yeah,
he
he
say,
signed.
but your brother was saying, help me, help me, help me.
My brother had run into the bathroom because my mother had shown up at his school to talk to him about the fact that she had just been served for custody, because my brother was now 14, I'm 18. He has signed off his rights of my mother's to go live with my father permanently. I am quarter way through my second semester of college when this happens. And my mother tells me over the phone, and my heart breaks because I'm still seeing the effect of their control at 18. They were refusing to give me my passport. They were refusing to give me my birth certificate. They were refusing to give me my belongings. They were refusing to help me with I had done a bat mitzvah when I was 14, and I had some money that had been given to me by family members, and with those and it was put into a fund. I wanted to use that fund to buy myself my first car, which I thought was a logical decision for a college kid. And because I didn't have a license, my father refused to give me the money. And he said he would only let me have my birth certificate and passport so I could get my learner's permit if I completed the driver's ed course,
Were
which
you,
is not legally required.
yeah, I was going to say that's if you were over 18, right? Like you don't need to do that.
Right. But he said that I was irresponsible and I was going to be irresponsible on the road. So that was their kind of like their reasoning behind it. Um, but after that, I sided with my mother totally. And that's when I see my mom kind of engaged in a lot more of the toxic behaviors that my father had done. And I think it was because she had gotten so used to this game at this point that she also she wanted to make sure I didn't leave her for any reason. And at that point, I hated them so much. Yeah,
Mom and
it worked.
stepmom.
Yeah. I hated my stepmother and my father so much because I was now worried, what is going to happen to my baby brother? My baby brother has, like I said, mild autism and doesn't always understand what's going on. He is very, I will say this, one thing I was able to do as a child that I'm not proud of is I was able to manipulate him and play him like a fiddle. If I was able to manipulate him as his sister, I can only imagine what my father and my stepmother have done to him.
Because you said it's been like 8 years since you've.
He's 22 now. I haven't talked to him in 8 years. We talked one other time after he signed the paperwork, and it was after he was taken on a trip to Norway and Iceland with Stephen and Leslie. And they had a great time, and he was showing me all of the Norse artifacts that they had gone and seen. And after that, I was blocked. I returned home from college because I recognized that my mom was not doing well and she needed somebody there. And because I had already kind of had this caretaker role with my mother, I came back and I helped her through that. I actually testified to my mother's lawyer about what had happened to me. I told them everything that I am telling you today. And for some reason, it got thrown out. I don't understand why. It was cited that I have borderline personality disorder in court. I don't. I remember my stepmother had actually met up with me for coffee during the custody battle because she wanted to apologize to me. And then once, and I don't agree with my mom sending me the court records of my brother's custody case. I did not need to know that. But at the time, it fueled my anger because I saw a part where my stepmother had cited that me and her relationship was on the mend because we had recently gone out for coffee. And that's when I realized that was a game. That was a calculated move.
Oh my God. I'm really sorry. That feeling, like when you realize that your parent has actually been a stranger, like they're a complete stranger. It's really creepy.
And I look at her and I'm like, I look at pictures of her and I see her eyes and I'm like, you literally look like you have ice in your eyes. You have nothing but poisoned ice in your eyes to me now.
So did you stop talking to your dad and your stepmom at any point?
I did. 3 years ago, I had told my father that I wanted to try again after some fights back and forth. I had threatened to go to the police over my passport and my birth certificate. It miraculously came up missing. I became very angry at them because they also gave away all of my belongings that were at their house. I became very angry at that and I cut off for about 6 months. And the last time I tried again, I said, we have to be brutally honest with each other, and I'm going to need to know some answers why you did certain things. And my father was at first, very honest about, the reason why with the boy from the original part of the story, the reason why they broke us up was because they thought that I was going to end up pregnant. Like that was the real reason, is they thought that we were going to be careless. Part of the reason why they moved me from school to school was because they thought that I was not making good quality friends and they were worried about what kind of risky behaviors that I was going to get myself into. And I was able to empathize with him for the first time. But at the same time, I still saw everything that they did as major overreactions and majorly wrong still. And it was hard for my father, I think, to face that. I remember it was 3 years ago. I came up to my father. We met for a lunch for my birthday, and I told him I was engaged. My boyfriend at the time had proposed to me on my birthday, and I was super excited I was engaged. And I told my father, and he was like, well, we have a restraining order on your mother, so if you want us to be at the wedding, you're going to have to pick between us.
Are you freaking kidding me? Like this has been your life put in the middle. I'm so sorry. That is, at some point you got it seems like they don't realize that you've become emotionally more mature than them. and then
Yeah.
they show their cards. It feels like they just show their hand.
Have
Like,
you read the book, The Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents?
no, but I absolutely need to. That title alone tells me.
Trust me, it will trigger you, but it is some eye-opening shit. I am telling you, it is
I don't know.
something that is.
I'll look into it. Yeah, for sure. Wow.
But I told him I was engaged, and he also put in that, and I had made it known that I was no longer following Judaism. I now consider myself a pagan. I don't have what I call a denomination. I'm not Wiccan, I'm not Norse, I'm not Egyptian, I'm not anything. I follow many different gods, and I believe more in the earth than anything else. I believe in, protecting the earth and doing what you can. Like, me and my husband are working to become homesteaders. That's part of the reason why we're looking at moving to Spokane, Washington, is because we want to have more land so we can actually farm and cultivate our land and be more at one with the earth. And one thing that we're always about is protecting our peace. But,
I love
with that being said, I told them, I was like, yeah, the wedding's probably going to be a pagan ceremony. And my father looked at me and he said, well, if it's going to be a pagan ceremony, I'm sorry, I can't support a pagan union. And that gutted me. So when Father's Day rolled around that year, I didn't send him anything for Father's Day. My stepmother sent me a nasty message taking back a picture of an art thing of when I was 15, where literally, if you looked at the picture, you could see how sad I was in my eyes. And she said, look, this was 10 years ago. Happier times. Seems like a lifetime ago. Would have been nice for your father to receive a Father's Day message. Sad to see that this is where we are.
Wow.
That's a direct quote. I have that text message.
Oh my gosh. She stuck it like a developmental age of a 12-year-old, a malicious bully that's a 12-year-old. So
Wait, literally.
you talk to them at all now? And what was the decision like for you?
After that message, I literally looked at my now husband, then fiance, and said, I want to change my phone number. And we were having issues with our cell phone carrier. So he was like, well, I'm wanting to switch to this new carrier anyway. So why don't we do it?
Yeah.
Switch my phone number. I cut off contact and I have not looked back.
Yeah.
And they've tried to reach out. They've sent me care packages. I've sent them back. They found my new address at the house that I live at. I sent all the things that they've sent me back. I still have not been able to reach my brother, but I do have a plan to try to reach him, because one thing I will say that has helped me through therapy is that I am not as fearful as I used to be. When my mother was going through the custody case with my brother, I had actually created a GoFundMe about what I had gone through, and I called it Save Troy. Somehow he caught wind of it. My father did. And they told me to take it down that day, or that I need to look up defamation and libel, and they were going to sue me for it. So I've already been sued for defamation and libel.
They carried through with that threat?
No, they never carried through, because I deleted the GoFundMe that day.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I was so scared.
Oh my gosh.
Now, the one thing I forgot to answer through this, and I'll answer it really quickly, was you had asked me, what was the catalyst that made me realize that it was parental alienation? It was actually a Dr. Phil episode.
So what point in the story did you watch that episode?
I was home after my mother was having like the issues with my brother's custody battle. And so my mother had basically, like, my mother was having a hard time with the custody battle, and we were just home, and I worked at a bakery for those years. Oh, that's what it was. My brother was reported as looking despondent and depressed by one of the court appointed therapists. And we were both so distraught at that finding, because we were like, if he is despondent and depressed, what is he feeling? What's going on? What is going on in his head? And so we were just turning on Dr. Phil, like we were just watching something kind of like haphazardly, like I was just hanging out with her. And I remember tuning in because this girl was talking about like how she hated her mom, and Dr. Phil was asking her questions about why do you hate your mom? And she was saying because daddy told me that she does this and blah blah blah. And they excused the little girl, and Dr. Phil talked to both of the parents and said, this is called parental alienation. This is what this is about. You are alienating your daughter from her parent.
Yeah.
And it was so devastating because I was like, holy mother of gods, there's a name for this.
Wow.
And I was devastated, but it was also worth it.
Well, first of all, did you know right away that's what happened to you? No question about it.
There was no questions about it. I saw the episode, I watched the whole thing. It was gripping to me. I could not wait for the commercials to be over so I could hear more of this story. And it was like every puzzle piece fit. All the manipulation, all the emotional gaslighting, all of the corruption, all of the control, all of the, you know, wording that they would use, like, don't you think that it's better if, or wouldn't it be better, blah blah blah. Like that was very common wording that I would hear. So
I know you have to go, but next time we'll pick up. I feel like that you have a two-part episode. Because this doesn't even, like, you learn about it and then you have the aftermath of learning about it. So that's a good place to leave so we can pick off
yeah,
the second half of the story. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing with me. Like, thank
thank
you.
you for listening.
Oh yeah. I just really appreciate you being brave enough to share your story, to reach out. It's bigger than us. I can say that. It's bigger than us. And I know that thinking about all those children who are still going through something like that is what the real reason why we're speaking out, you know?
The more we speak out, the more that we give air to their voices.
Exactly. Because they don't have one right now, or until they honestly escape the, yeah, but
I think the best thing you have to do for an alienated kid is you need to get out of that situation. You need to get away from that as far as possible, and you need to start forming your own opinions. You need to really start asking yourself those questions of, is this my opinion? Or was this an opinion that was formed based off of information someone else has given to me and not firsthand knowledge?
That is so well put. I just got goosebumps again. I've gotten goosebumps this whole time you're talking.
I have to give you kudos as well because you started this channel and have started to be a voice, and there's always has to be that one whistleblower that gets everything started. And I think that, Maddie, you have that power in your voice to be that whistleblower.
Anyways, I hope you have a really good night, and I would love to be friends.
Absolutely. And coordinate, and then we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.